So I am going to share my screen here. Amy, can you see the screen all right?
Yes, we've got it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Amy and Ben, and the MEA membership for spending some time here with me and the organization. In keeping in line with the COVID updates and how your business can kind of manage COVID and ultimately maybe even gain, we're going to talk about some tax credits that directly involve COVID. One of them, the ERC tax credit, is certainly directly involved with the COVID crisis that's been happening over, say, the last 2 years or so. So that's me, the Business Development Director for HireTech. Today, we're going to talk about these tax credits in an information format. This is for your information. I will just disclose fully that every business that we talk to, we always tell them, you can do these tax credits on your own. You don't need HireTech to do it. We do have a service that helps with it and streamlines it and makes it easy and compliant and all that. But ultimately, this is just for your information. Just wanted to let you know. And now I'll switch slides here and get rid of that cheesy photograph. So 3 ways that your company can benefit through tax credits. This is what we're going to talk about today. The work opportunity tax credit, the employee retention tax credit, and the research and development tax credit. You may be familiar with one of them, or 2 of them, or all of them, or none of them. We're going to go over each one in just a really quick overview, just to make sure that you understand what the opportunities are and how this can help your business, and particularly during COVID. So I'll go to the next here. And I'll also say, if you have any questions, just you can type them in, I believe, and Amy's going to kind of read those along. We can also have questions at the end or during the presentation, whenever you might think that you'd like to type those in. So hiring credits, right? The work opportunity tax credit and location-based incentives. So the work opportunity tax credit, it's commonly known as WOTC in the business, is a federal tax credit that reduces the federal tax liability of businesses. Essentially, every time every time you hire an employee, then that employee can be a tax credit for the business. The work opportunity tax credit has been around for 22 years. And what you want to do is have your employees, or your new hires, I should say, fill out an 8850 form. That's the federal tax credit form that has to be filled out by the employee. You can assist the employee in filling out this 8850 form, but what it does is just ask them questions about, like, if they're a veteran or if they have collected an unemployment check in the last 6 months. Now that's a big one because of COVID, because as you know, lots of folks were on unemployment, and then you might be hiring somebody that was on unemployment or still is, and you can get a tax credit for that, right? So that's one direct way that the work opportunity tax credit relates to the COVID crisis. There are other categories as well. I think some of those categories are in our next slide, but before I switch to the next slide, wanted to also tell you that once you fill out this 8850 form, and it's a government form that you can Google and print off, it has to be sent into the state agency on whatever state that the employee was hired in. So you might be a multi-state business, and so that 8850 form has to go into the state agency in order to apply for the tax credit. And if it goes there, all right, hang on, I lost my screen for a second, sorry. So if the tax credit in the 8850 form, here I got it, if the 8850 form is submitted to the state, it takes the state anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get back to you with the certified tax credit. So it is a process to obtain the tax credit, and once you start doing it, it does get easier in order to obtain that tax credit. It's a federal tax credit that comes off the federal tax credit liability.
Quick question, Mike.
Sure.
Someone's asking, are you guys getting that feedback? How far back can you go with the 8850 form?
Sure, okay, great question. So there's a 28-day window. So it is not retroactive in the sense that you can go back any farther than 28 days, but you can go back 28 days from the time that you hired, from when you start the program, right? So if you're just now starting and you've hired 5 people, they understand that, well, you're going to have to maybe look back 28 days from the time that you actually start the program. Traditionally, once you start the program, they'd like to see the 8850 form done on the day that they fill out the I-9 is when the date should be on the 8850 form. But depending on the state agency, there's 50 states, of course, that handle this tax credit. Some will take it 2 weeks out or 2 weeks prior, but most want to see it done on the same day that they fill out the I-9 or before.
Great.
But yeah. All right. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. Let's see. We'll go to the next slide. So as I talked about the 8850 form, these are the categories, right, of new hires that could potentially get you a tax credit because you've hired somebody like this. We talked about unemployment recipient and how that can affect your business. You're hiring people that might be on unemployment. You can get a tax credit for that. Veterans and their spouses, anyone on public assistance, food stamps, TANF benefits, that's temporary assistance for needy families, Medicaid, things like that. If you're hiring someone like that, then you can get a tax credit for that. Social SSI, parents of disabled children, felony convictions, even if they're a felon and you're hiring them, kind of giving them a second chance or third, then you can get a tax credit for that. There's other forms of public assistance offered at the state level, and the work opportunity tax credit, they're at least once a year or so, they're adding a category or something. It's always reflected on the 8850 form. And in my world, Higher Tech, we have a survey that your new hires would answer, and it actually eliminates the 8850 form. But again, you can do it on your own and you can send in the 8850 form. All right, next slide here. Is this a mandatory program? I wanted to kind of go over that. That's usually a question that we hear about. It's voluntary. You don't have to participate in it as a business, of course. But more importantly, and what I wanted to put up here was that your employee doesn't have to either, right? You can present the 8850 form to them. You can say, hey, we participate in a tax credit program that helps with funds for your training. Can you fill out this 8850 form, please? If they say no, I'd rather not, then that's the end of it. You wouldn't want to take it any further than that. We have some language here at Higher Tech that kind of helps even with that potential problem, but it usually is never a problem because your new hires will be familiar with the Work Opportunity Tax Credit Program if they've ever worked for a company like Lowe's or Home Depot or Jack in the Box or Target or anywhere in a mall or an auto group, if they've ever worked for an auto group, or GM or a used car lot or anything like that. All of these businesses, and certainly the larger ones, have taken advantage of this Work Opportunity Tax Credit Program, and they've included this 8850 form in some fashion, usually in a survey that I mentioned earlier. And so your new hires will be familiar with it. It doesn't throw them off at all. Usually about 95% of the time when you ask them to fill out an 8850 form, they go, oh yeah, right, I've done this before. They just do it. So let's see, I think I have a question here. Can this be offered through an online onboarding option? Yes, it can. Depending on your onboarding system that you use, I'll just mention one, TalentReef. TalentReef has a onboarding option. We have clients with TalentReef. So easy to put this in your onboarding option as a survey, right? You could put it in your online onboarding option as an 8850 form that you added in on your own without using a vendor like Higher Tech. You could put in that 8850 form, and then they would have to either fill it out online through a PDF version of it that you added, or they would have to print it and fill it out and scan it and send it back through the onboarding option, or they could just bring in the 8850 form after they printed it off on your online version. But there's lots of ways to present the Work Opportunity Tax Credit 8850 form to them on onboarding. I see another question. Do you offer it to all employees universally, and can they decide if they want to answer it or not? That's exactly right. That's what you do. You just put it there. If it's on onboarding, or even if you're doing paper-based, it's usually when you present the I-9, or maybe a day or two before you present the I-9. So that way they can fill it out, and if they decide not to, then they just decide not to. You can even come up with some language, like I kind of mentioned that we have. You just, even if they say, I'd rather not fill it out, you just say, okay, well, this is a way that helps us with your training costs, and if you qualify for it, you know, we get some reimbursement for your training costs as we're working with it. But it doesn't affect your job at all if you don't fill it out, or you do fill it out. It's not going to affect anything, so then you kind of move forward like that.
Mike, we've got one other question coming from the Q&A. If it's a federal credit, why are we sending it to the state?
Sure, that's a great answer. So, or a great question, excuse me. So it's a federal program, but all 50 states have a Work Opportunity Tax Credit agency that they send the 8850 form. And the reason why is because each state has its own, say, TANF program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. They have their own Veteran Affairs Administration in that state, and it's the state's job to double check that the new hire is actually answered truthfully or correctly, right? Most people don't say that they're a veteran when they're not, but some people will say, yes, I've collected food stamps, let's say, but they actually are off them now, or they've been off them for 2 years and they didn't even realize that their spouse took them off as food stamps. So it's the state agency's job to verify all the information, and then it's the federal government that you and the IRS that make sure that you can utilize the tax credit against your federal tax credit liability. So that's the reason why the state's involved, to verify. Possible credit amounts, I see. It varies anywhere from $500 per employee to all the way up to $9,600 if you hire a veteran that is, I believe it's 60% disabled. Those disabled veterans tax credits at the $9,600 level are very rare. There's another one for veterans that's about $5,000, and that's more likely. There's another one for veterans that's $2,450, and that certainly is the one that we see the most. But the average tax credit that you would receive if you were to go through the gamut of your employees that qualified would be about $1,200 or so. Usually about, well, I will say anywhere from 10% to 25% of your workforce will qualify for the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. So to make it really easy here, you hire 10 people per year, 2 are probably going to qualify. The average tax credit would be around $1,300 or so. So you might, if you hire 10 people, you might get a tax credit for $2,600. But in that same population, it might be 8,000 or 10,000 or none, right? You're going to get until you start asking them to fill out the 8850 form. So that's kind of the amounts, and thank you for that question. Why would an employee agree to share such personal information, right? Because you're asking them, are you on food stamps, or have you collected TANF benefits? And so typically new hires, as I said, are very familiar with those types of programs, tend to agree to participate once they learn it provides a benefit to your company for their training. But anyone that doesn't want to participate in WOTC can just simply skip it. All right, I'll go to the next section here. What if we don't have a tax liability due to operating loss or net operating loss or deduction? Are we eligible to use the Work Opportunity Tax Credit? Yes, you are. If you are in a net operating loss or NOLs, the tax credits carry forward for 20 years. So you can always use them at your next availability that you can. I just wanted to address that just in case anybody had some questions about that. So that is the work opportunity tax credit as we transition to employee retention tax credit, trying to be mindful of our time here. Just to sum up the work opportunity tax credit, federal program, you can get a tax credit due to the folks that you hire. You do have to present them with an 8850 form for them to fill out, and then you have to send it into the state. By the way, some states require that you PDF it and send it to them through their system. There's a few states out there, it's rare that they have you mail it in. And then vendors like HireTech have a system that streamlines it for sure. Okay, so the employee retention tax credit, right? So this is a tax credit that keeps truly with the theme of how to manage COVID and your business. Because this is a tax credit, it's the payroll tax credit that is direct, that helps businesses that were affected by COVID. And of course, all businesses were affected by COVID. But in order to qualify for the tax credit, the more that your business was affected by COVID, the better chance you have at qualifying. Not every business qualifies for the ERC tax credit. You usually have to have some sort of loss in revenue in a quarter, and the available quarters, by the way, second, third, and fourth in 2020, and the first, second, and third in 2021. Those are the quarters that your company can potentially utilize the ERC tax credit. So it's a retroactive tax credit, obviously, and the more that your business was affected by COVID and you had a negative impact on revenue in one of those quarters, compared to the base year, which is 2019, if you have some loss in that quarter, you're well on the way to qualify. There's a couple other things that kind of have to happen here, but in order to qualify, I won't get into the weeds on it, but it is certainly something worth exploring if you've lost some revenue due to COVID. Now I'll just kind of go through our points here as I said that. It's a payroll tax credit, and it brings a check from the IRS back to your business. It's retroactive. So what we're talking about is a check that comes back to the owners of the business that is untaxable and is a result of you amending the 941s. The 941s have to be amended. Anyone kind of involved in payroll will know what those 941s are. The 941s are what you pay the payroll tax every quarter on. And ultimately, when you qualify for this tax credit, you get some or even all or even more than you paid in payroll tax during that quarter. This really is an amazing tax credit. If you qualify, you're talking about anywhere from $2,000 to, in some cases, and this is usually for restaurants and hotels because they were so affected by COVID, anywhere from $2,000 to up to $33,000 per employee. So really an amazing opportunity. The employee retention tax credit is a payroll tax credit that was expanded on January 31st, 2021 by Congress. I included that there because Congress has changed this tax credit quite a bit. You may have thought that you do not qualify, but Congress has changed the rules now 3 times. And each time they've changed it, it's been advantageous for the business in order. Just wanted to let you know about that. Congress has changed these rules about ERC tax credit, and it may be worth looking into if you thought originally that you didn't qualify. The revenue rules. The original revenue rules was you have to lose 20% in a quarter or even 50% in a quarter revenue. And there's been some changes to that to make it more usable by a business. The ERC tax credit time frame is March 13th to December 31st, 2021. That actually has been changed. It's it's September, the end of September 31st, 2021. So that's one of the changes that even I didn't get. PPP loans do not exclude businesses from ERC tax credit opportunities. Originally, when the ERC tax credit came out, the rules were, if you took a PPP loan, then you cannot take advantage of the ERC tax credit. Congress saw that 90% of businesses in America that would qualify for the ERC tax credit were taking PPP loans. And so that wasn't the original intent of an ERC tax credit, is to disinclude everyone. And so they changed the rules for that. So you can still take advantage of it if you qualify and you even took a PPP loan. Ways to qualify for the ERC. And I mentioned that a little bit. There it is. Your business may qualify for the ERC tax credit. If compared to 2019, your business lost 20% of revenue in any quarter. And again, your business may qualify for the ERC tax credit in 2019 if your business lost 50% revenue in any quarter in 2021. But this is the change. The partial shutdown of any loss and with any loss of revenue in a quarter compared to 2000. So what is partial shutdown, right? That's the new rule change. Things that happen to your business because of COVID regulation. Shift or hours changed due to workers due to COVID regulations. You paid employees during COVID testing or during quarantine. You had difficulty getting necessary supplies on the supply chain. All of those things that probably happened to you are factors in getting you qualified for this tax credit, even if you only lost, say, 3% of revenue in a quarter. The ERC cutoff date. So on this one, I did get it right. September 31st, 2021 is the cutoff date. So I'll fix that on the slide about the December 31st reference earlier. Is the cutoff date for calculation of the ERC tax credit, right? So that's when the last day that you can actually calculate the tax credit, but you can file for it all the way up into the end of 2022. Of course, it's best to file for this credit as soon as possible. They do have language in place now to make it to where you can file for this tax credit in 2023. That's expected to pass as well. So they're going to give you plenty of time to retroactively file for this credit, but the actual time frame that you can calculate the tax credit is retroactively March 13th, 2020 to September 31st, 2021. So I thought I saw, no, I didn't see a question, so I'll move on. ERC tax credit filing. Filing is done by the individual business or your payroll company using the calculations and substantiation. So this tax credit has to be calculated, it has to be substantiated. You have to prove that you qualify. And HIREtech as a vendor, of course, helps businesses with that. But again, this is something that you could do on your own if you wanted to. You certainly could. It must be done on the 941 or the 941X, as it's called. The 941X is the way to amend the 941s by your company or your payroll company. And of course, as I've mentioned many times here, it's a retroactive credit. But keeping in with the theme of how to help your business during COVID, that's what the employee retention tax credit is. I'll stop there before we go on to a very popular tax credit for manufacturers, which is the research and development tax credit. If you have any questions about the ERC, please just post them in, or we can get to them later. And of course, even after this presentation, and you think of something that you have, you can reach out to Amy or to Ben or to me, and we can get your questions answered. All right, so it won't take much time to get through the research and development tax credit, and it looks like we got about 2 minutes here or so. So it's the R&D tax credit. It's actually been around now since 1981 in some form or another. And what this is to encourage American industry to invest in research and development activities. This credit is to stimulate R&D activities among businesses through tax incentives, of course. However, R&D is defined very wide when it comes to this tax credit. You don't have to be working for NASA or a contractor for NASA to take advantage of the R&D tax credit. In fact, you can be manufacturing anything. You can be a plastic injection molding company making garbage cans, right? And because you have to go through a certain level of engineering or discovery process, and which plastic will work well, and all of that can be wrapped up in an R&D tax credit. Fabricators, engineering, of course, software developers, anybody working with chemicals and you're manufacturing anything chemically, tool and die, even machine shops, right? So kind of the lower level of manufacturing, those machine shops can qualify as well. And let's see, I think I have a question come up. Do you have to fit into one of those industries for the R&D tax credit? No, you don't. Those are just examples. Thank you for asking that question and clarifying that. It's really, if you're manufacturing anything, if you're coming up with any sort of new way of producing an item or a product, those can potentially be wrapped up in an R&D tax credit study. And that's what has to be done, by the way, for the R&D. Is kind of, you have to do a study on it, and you have to prove some of the things that your employees are doing in order to change, to adapt to, say, for instance, customer specs, right? If a customer is asking you to build something this way and not that way, you have to kind of figure that out as a company and as a team. That is what the R&D tax credit is designed to reward. But those are some of the categories that do qualify for the R&D tax credit. But you're right, there are others. All right, I think that is it for me and for the presentation. Of course, 3 ways to capitalize on tax credits: research and development, ERC, and the work opportunity tax credit. And I will now turn it back over to Amy. Thank you, Amy.
Great, thank you, Mike, so much. Such a interesting and a little bit different than what we do most weeks. So, and certainly people, if you have additional questions, we can get you hooked up with Mike